Barry Cummins reporting. I'm joined now by the Minister of State for Housing, Damien English, and by Carl Dieter, analyst with Irish Mortgage Brokers. Damien English, a lot of people saying this doesn't go far enough. It's only Dublin, it's only Cork. It doesn't cover Galway, where rents rose 11% last year, Limerick, where rents rose 12% last year, or the commuter belt.
Well, first of all, I mean, I think it's about trying to get a balance, and we're trying to deal with runaway rents in certain parts, which is very clearly in Dublin and Cork, and also try to encourage increased supply of rental properties as well. So we have to get the balance right, and there are 29 actions here in this plan. It's a full strategy that will deal with short-term issues like the cost of rent, like security of tenure, like services, but also puts in place the plan to develop a long-term sustainable rental market that we need in this country, that we want. Over 30% of people actually rent now, so we need that strategy. So in terms of the areas it deals with immediately Cork and Dublin, assuming that the legislation can get through the Dáil and the Senate in the next week or two. But there's a process then put in place to deal with other areas, because it's correct to say there might be pressure zones in Galway or Limerick or Meath, from myself, or in the Greater Dublin region of Kildare, Wicklow, that need to be looked at. But there's a process now. If this legislation goes through, there's a process there. The RTB can use that. They can use the data. They can analyse it and make correct decisions.
Sudden spiral of rents in Meath, as
you
mentioned.
Well, no, because this builds on the rent certainty measures that were brought in 2015, less than 12 months ago, by Alan Kelly. And in that case, there's only one rent review within 24 months. So in other cases, that still stands. So this is an appropriate measure to deal with an emergency situation in probably Dublin and Cork, but then sets out a manner to deal with other areas if the proof is there. The
other criticism that's made by a lot of people is the 4% cap. At a time when inflation is more or less zero, you're handing more profits to landlords.
Well, for a start, the 4%, if a 4% increase is a lot better than a 12% increase or a 17% increase. We had a lady on from Cork there today who said her rent could go from $950 today to $1,400 next year. Under our measures here, that can't happen. Her rent will only go up to about €1,000, so it's an increase of €38 if these measures are in place. So I think the 4% is appropriate to deal with existing tenancies and existing people, but without scaring off investors. Because I have to stress, David, we have to get the balance here, because we want to encourage more people to come in to provide accommodation for tenants. And so if we go too far with this, we'll dilute supply, and that's not what we want either.
Yeah, sure. Now, you think this is appropriate. Obviously, Simon Coveney thinks it's appropriate. The government thinks it's appropriate. All well and good. Fianna Fáil doesn't think it's appropriate. Barry Cowan issued a statement now within the last few minutes. He's not happy about the 4%. He's not happy about the restriction to Dublin and Cork. Are you going to make changes to keep Fianna Fáil on board, because you can't pass it without them?
No, well, this went through Cabinet this morning, and we're very strong on this position that it has to be the 4% is the correct figure, the correct mark. There's science behind it. We spent the last 3 or 4 months researching this policy. We consulted with stakeholders of a couple of different events. There was over 500 submissions. Fianna Fáil and many others made submissions as well. And we have to try to negotiate our way through this over the next week in committee stage in the Dáil, in report stage. But I believe that all the parties and all the independent TDs want to see some of these measures brought in.
Sure.
We might differ over percentages, but what's important here is that we do something.
But is this open to change?
It's not open for change, because
it's not open for change.
We've
the 4%
done a lot.
Is written
the 4% is a Cabinet decision after months of negotiations to try to get it right. We think it's the correct balance. Yeah, it's our job to try to convince Fianna Fáil and others to accept this. But I think it's important that we do something in this area, and to let the Dáil finish up next week without bringing this would be wrong.
But you're not going to change the 4%?
I said, David, it's well worked out in research. There's a reason for it. And
so you're not going to change it?
No, we're standing by it.
Grant. Carl Dieter, rents have been skyrocketing. Clearly, it wasn't sustainable to wait in the hope that supply would increase. Something had to be done.
If you're a believer in policy interventions, then that's the whole basis for doing something like this. My own view and the academic literature usually shows that price fixing isn't the right approach. This does have elements of price fixing in it. That said, we've had almost 4 years of double-digit increases, and if you're going to do something to try and put some parameters on how those increases will occur and when, it may work in the short term. Really, from an analysis point of view, you ask yourself, what are the risks, what are they hoping to do, and will it work? What they're hoping to do is try and calm the rental market. Now, you can't really do that when supply is short. You can come out quite confidently and say, look, this will fix everything. It won't. We've still got massive problems. But it is an ambitious plan, and it is a bit more thought out than some of the ideas that I've seen elsewhere, if you're a believer in this type of policy intervention.
But if the market is dysfunctional, something has to be done to correct it, surely?
Well, the thing that normally happens to correct it is that things go back into equilibrium by supply coming on board, and there's lots of movement in that direction in terms of new starts, in terms of many things. In fact, the rental inflation is already pretty much baked in. It's starting to slow down. The thing I would say when people are talking about, you know, not going out far enough, there's two triggers in this. One is that prices have to have been rising on an annual basis by more than 7% in 4 of 6 quarters. The other thing is that rents have to be above average national rent. Well, actually, across the nation, in more than 4 of 6 quarters, rents have been going up by more than 7%. Outside of Dublin houses, outside of Dublin apartments, in Dublin houses, in Dublin apartments. So this, one of the triggers, is already in work right across the entire nation. What it can do is then kick in anywhere that rents are over about €940 currently. So I think this will spread, and it will spread rapidly. And if it has negative outcomes, it could be that people start to find ways around it. Maybe there will be some kind of informal pricing in the market, or people will charge one thing for the house and more for car spaces, or they'll start to put forward unfurnished houses, or make the tenant pay for the letting fee. When you do something like this, it's not that the policy is the error, it's everything else that happens as a result of it, which is where you get caught out. OK,
so not watertight. Or can any policy like this be watertight?
I don't believe there is a watertight solution. What I would say, and I have to commend the department on this, is it is one of the most ambitious groups of changes being put through with an emergency level of speed that I haven't seen since the banking guarantee.
OK, well, that remains to be seen whether it gets through with that speed. But, David English, I mean, there is a problem, as Carl has mentioned. You know, informal arrangements can be made. Really impossible for the Residential Tenancies Board to keep an eye on all of that.
No, I think the Residential Tenancies Board can do a great job here, and they're certainly...
You're giving them extra resources?
They will be getting extra resources. They will need them. They have a very important job to do here. But it is also about getting the balance between landlords and tenants, and to make sure that everyone is treated properly, and that people have rights and responsibilities. But what I would say is that, again, the 4% is appropriate, because we don't believe it'll lead to the concerns Carl has. We think it's at the right level. If we went too far...
Sure, how would it lead to people... I mean, I've seen some landlords saying, oh, it'll drive people out of the market. Sure, they've had huge increases over the last couple of years. This is only stopping them making super profits.
No, in fairness, if we want to encourage more people to invest in rental property, it's a complicated area as it is, and the whole idea of having a 29 action plan rental strategy, not just one about 4%, there's many other actions as well, is to make it a safer place to invest in, make it a better place for people to actually who want to rent and to continue to rent. But it has to be attractive that you get a return on your money. We believe 4% it allows for that, right? But I have to stress, David, and Carl have made the point too, we need additional accommodation in all these pressure areas, and a key area here is to bring in a lot of supply measures, which will give us that.
Yeah, but the other point that Carl made about people paying cash under the counter, all of that sort of stuff, there's no way you can stop that.
You can't stop it in all cases. It happens in any form of business. But what we're trying to do is make the rental a business for people who actually are professional landlords to get into the business and treat it like a business. And I think the RTB do an excellent job here. But I mean, this is also policed by individuals themselves. And, you know, quite a high... I think probably the majority of tenancies are registered with the RTB. They're dealt with appropriately. There are enforcement procedures there. Yeah. If something happens outside this legislation, we'll hear about it, Dave. Okay. You'll hear about it. We'll be in here discussing it, and we can deal with it then.
OK. Carl Dieter, you've looked at rent controls or caps on rent increases in other countries. Do they work?
They tend not to, and a lot of the places that we laud as having these perfect systems, when you actually go there, you find out that they're deeply flawed. I would like to say, though, that when you're talking about, you know, wanting to encourage supply so that people will be in the business, anyone who's a new entrant or doing new build actually won't be affected by these rules. But I think it's important to point out that, you know, the likes of vulture funds, which we hear about all the time, they're going to be responsible for about 75% of new supply in Dublin. So the same people that we give tax concessions to, we give them to them again and again. And I'm not upset about that, but I am upset about the ill treatment of the indigenous investors, where you've got this upside-down, topsy-turvy taxation treatment that started back in 2009 and hasn't been fixed in the last 5 to 6 years, where you brought out local property tax, which can't be deducted by landlords as an expense. And so we're talking in one way, and we talk about things like we want this, but what we actually do is something very different.
But I suppose in answer to that, the Department of Finance now will chair a new working group to look at all the tax system around the rental sector, and to bring in changes if need be, because there is issues there to make it appropriate to have, you know, the right kind of people we want in the rental sector as well. But I think...
David English, Carl Dieter, thank you both indeed for joining us.